Imagine a man who has etched 3,000 stories onto other people's skin. Faces so lifelike they seem to breathe, eyes that follow you across the room. Yet who has spent 18 years refusing to draw a single holy image. Now picture that same man, mid-career, suddenly agreeing to tattoo the Virgin Mary for a stranger. What happens when the needle touches the outline of her eyes? Something impossible unfolds. A scent of roses that has no source, warmth rising in hands that have never trembled, and a gaze that blinks back at him. By the end of the session, the atheist artist is weeping like a child. This is the story of Derek Collins, and it begins in a quiet third-floor studio in New York where miracles hide in plain sight. Before we continue, share in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. Let's see how far the miracles of the Virgin Mary have reached. And if you haven't yet joined our family, subscribe now, because here, each day, we witness the tender love and mighty power of the Mother of God. Derek Collins was 43, with the steady hands of a surgeon and the patience of a monk. His studio sat midway up a pre-war brick building on the Lower East Side, the kind of place where the elevator creaks like it remembers every secret whispered inside. No neon signs screamed his name. He didn't need one. Word of mouth, Instagram reels that racked up millions of views, and an 8-month waiting list for consultations did the advertising for him. Walk through the frosted glass door and you were met by clean white walls, soft LED lighting that never cast shadows on the skin, and the faint hum of autoclaves sterilizing tools. It smelled of green tea and isopropyl alcohol. Nothing floral, nothing sweet. Derek kept it that way on purpose. That hyperrealism was his language. Portraits of lost grandparents. The last photo of a soldier before deployment, a child's handprint superimposed over a father's wedding band. Each piece so precise you could count the pores. Clients flew in from Tokyo, Sydney, Sao Paulo just to sit in his chair. Other artists referred their impossible requests to him, the way medieval guilds deferred to master illuminators. Derek had won national conventions in Chicago, judged panels in London, lectured at tattoo universities that didn't officially exist yet. He could render a single tear frozen mid-fall or the exact curvature of a smile that had been gone for 20 years. Yet in all that catalog of human emotion, he never once inked a crucifix, a saint, a halo. If someone asked, he'd smile the way a librarian smiles when you request a book they don't stock. "Not my specialty," he'd say. "I can recommend someone who lives for that." The refusal wasn't drama. It was quiet, final, almost polite. Derek didn't argue theology in bars or post manifestos online. He simply didn't believe, not in the shouting sense, but in the deeper, bone-level way that leaves no room for negotiation. His wife, Megan, attended Mass on Sundays with their 8-year-old son Noah. Derek stayed home, made pancakes, scrolled through tattoo forums. Christmas meant lights, eggnog, and a tree cut from a New Jersey farm. It never meant midnight Mass or Advent wreaths. When a client finished a session and murmured, "God bless you," Derek nodded the way you nod at a stranger who compliments your shoes. Acknowledgement without agreement. People assumed he was indifferent. Maybe he was, for a while. But indifference is just another word for a wound that scabbed over. Derek carried his story the way some men carry a limp. You notice only if you know where to look. It started when he was 15, in a suburb outside Rochester. His little sister Emily, blonde pigtails, gap-toothed grin, the kind of kid who collected ladybugs in jars, got sick. At first doctors thought flu. Then tests multiplied like rabbits. Leukemia, stage 4. The word landed in their kitchen with the finality of a judge's gavel. Derek's parents aged a decade in a month. He learned to fold hospital gowns, to time chemotherapy drips, to pray. Oh, he prayed. On his knees beside his bed, rosary beads he'd swiped from his grandmother's drawer, promises tumbling out like coins from a torn pocket. If Emily lived, he'd never skip church again. If Emily lived, he'd become a priest. If Emily lived, he'd trade every future joy for one more summer of her laughter. She died 3 days shy of her 11th birthday. Derek buried the rosary in the backyard, stopped going to Mass, and never looked back. Not once. 27 years later, the wound was still there, calcified into a rule: no religious tattoos. Until the morning Rachel walked in. She was 34, ponytail the color of autumn leaves, eyes ringed with the exhaustion of a mother who'd carried more than her share. Derek had met her 2 months earlier during a consultation crammed into the sliver of time between clients. She'd sat on the edge of the leather stool, hands folded like she was already confessing, and said she wanted the Virgin Mary on her left ribcage. Hyper-realistic, medium-sized, eyes that looked back. The request hit his usual wall. He opened his mouth to deliver the standard refusal, but something in her voice snagged. Not desperation, more like a quiet, exhausted certainty. She told him why she needed it. The story spilled out. Her son Lucas, born with a congenital heart defect, the cardiologist who'd laid out survival odds like a blackjack dealer, the surgeries at 3 months, 8 months, the endless scans. And then, the part that made Derek pause. Her mother, who had died when Rachel was 21, had kept a small statue of Our Lady of Guadalupe on her nightstand. Every evening, she'd pray the rosary until the beads clicked like beads of rain. When Lucas was diagnosed, Rachel dug the statue out of a box in the attic. She didn't remember the prayers, but she remembered the eyes, serene, unflinching, maternal. For 2 years she'd stared into them every night and whispered, "Please, save him." The doctors called the recovery a medical mystery. Lucas was 3 now, running circles around the other kids at preschool, heart as strong as any. Derek listened without interrupting, something he rarely did. When she finished, the studio felt smaller. He heard himself say, "I can do it." The words surprised him more than her. He scheduled the session for that Tuesday at 10 sharp. That morning, he arrived early as always. The autoclave hissed like a contented cat. He wiped down the chair, laid out inks in a rainbow of blues and umbers, tested the machine's buzz against his palm. Routine, muscle memory, armor. At 9:58 the buzzer sounded. Rachel stepped inside wearing a loose gray sweater and the kind of smile that says, "I've already lost too much to be nervous now." Derek motioned her to the table, transferred the stencil, adjusted the drape. The Virgin's outline settled against Rachel's skin like it belonged there. He picked up the needle, and for the first time in 18 years, Derek Collins broke his own rule. The consultation 2 months earlier had been brief, almost clinical at first. Rachel sat across from Derek at the small consultation table, phone in hand, scrolling through saved images of the Virgin Mary, Byzantine icons with golden halos, Renaissance Madonnas draped in soft blue, modern devotional art glowing under candlelight. She paused on one particular reproduction, a close-up of Our Lady of Czestochowa, the ancient Black Madonna whose dark eyes have watched over pilgrims for centuries. "This expression," Rachel said, voice low. "She looks like she knows every fear you've ever carried. Like she's already holding it for you." Derek studied the reference. The eyes were deep-set, calm, sorrowful yet steady. He had drawn thousands of eyes, grieving widows, proud fathers, sleeping infants. But these carried a weight he couldn't name that he sketched the outline quickly. The gentle oval of the face, the flowing veil, the hands folded in quiet prayer. Everything flowed as it always did, proportions perfect, symmetry instinctive. Then he reached the eyes. The pencil hesitated. He drew the first iris, shaded the pupil, added the catchlight. Looked, erased, drew again. The curve felt wrong, the depth shallow. He tried once more. Still not right. Rachel waited without complaint, sipping water, watching his hand move and stop, move and stop. 40 minutes passed before he settled on a version that was acceptable, not flawless, not the way his hands usually obeyed. He showed it to her. "It's beautiful," she whispered. That's exactly how I see her. Derek nodded, but inside a small voice whispered, "It's not finished." Tuesday arrived clear and crisp, the kind of October morning when New York pretends it's still kind. Rachel lay on the table, sweater folded neatly beside her, skin exposed along the left rib cage. The stencil transferred cleanly, the outline settled like a promise against her pale side. Derek adjusted the machine, selected the first needle, a fine liner for the crispest edges, and began. The first 2 hours passed in the familiar rhythm. Outline first, steady lines tracing the silhouette, the veil's folds, the delicate curve of cheek and brow. Rachel breathed evenly, wincing only once when the needle grazed a sensitive spot. "I'm okay," she murmured when he paused to check. Derek worked in near silence, the buzz of the machine the only conversation. Every so often he wiped excess ink, inspected the progress, nodded to himself. The base shadows came next, soft grays layered beneath the skin tone, building dimension the way light falls across a marble statue in a cathedral. It was technically impeccable. Another artist would have called it finished already. To eye in the third hour, he moved to the face proper. Cheeks gained subtle blush, the nose a gentle bridge of shadow and highlight. The veil received its own life, translucent folds that seemed to float above the skin rather than lie flat upon it. Rachel stayed remarkably still, eyes closed, lips moving now and then in what might have been silent prayer. Derek felt the concentration settle over him like a second skin. Then, just as he began blending the transition from veil to hair, the first strangeness arrived. A scent, faint at first, almost imagined, like someone had brushed past carrying a single stem of roses. He paused, needle hovering. The studio had no flowers, it never did. No candles, no incense, nothing to mask the sterile cleanliness he demanded. He glanced toward the window, closed. The vent, silent. Rachel opened one eye. "You okay?" she asked softly. Derek forced a small smile. "Fine, just checking the shading." He returned to work, but the fragrance grew. Not overpowering, never cloying, just present, persistent, as though an invisible bouquet had been placed inches from the table. Rose petals warmed by sunlight. Old gardens after rain. The scent Catholics associate with certain apparitions, with saints who smelled of flowers and death, with the tradition that says the Virgin herself leaves that perfume behind when she passes near. Derek knew none of that history consciously. He only knew the smell didn't belong here. He ignored it, or tried to. The fourth hour began. Now he was on the eyes, the part he had dreaded since the sketch. He started with the left one, contour of the iris first, then layers of deep brown warmed by amber undertones. Tiny flecks of gold for the catchlights, the way light hits a living pupil. The machine hummed. The scent thickened, almost tangible. And then, heat, not from friction, not from the grip. A sudden, internal warmth spreading through his palms, up his wrists, as though someone had poured warm oil over his hands. He flexed his fingers once, twice. No redness, no swelling, just heat. Intense. Alive. He glanced at Rachel. Her eyes were closed again, face serene. Derek swallowed, steadied the needle, continued. The left eye took shape. Better than the sketch. Much better. The depth came effortlessly now, shadows pooling in corners that should have been flat. He cleaned the area, tilted the light. The iris seemed to hold more than pigment, something watchful, tender, almost breathing. He shook his head once, as if to clear a dream, and moved to the right eye. The rose scent wrapped around him like a shawl. The heat in his hands pulsed in time with his heartbeat. He worked faster, not out of panic, but out of a strange urgency, as though the image were finishing itself through him. Final strokes. Final highlights. A last delicate line along the lower lid to give the gaze its gentle sorrow. He wiped the skin one last time, stepped back, and looked. The eyes were no longer just ink. They were alive. Not metaphorically, not poetically. They looked back at him with recognition, with knowledge, with something infinitely patient and infinitely kind. Derek's breath caught. He blinked hard. The eyes did not change. Then, for one impossible second, he saw it. A subtle, unmistakable blink. The lids lowered a fraction, rose again. Impossible. Tattoos do not move. Ink does not blink. Yet he had seen it. His heart hammered against his ribs. The machine slipped in his grip. He caught it just before it fell. Tears, hot, sudden, unasked for, spilled down his cheeks. He didn't understand why. He wasn't sad. He wasn't joyful. The tears simply came, as though something inside him had finally cracked open and let the pressure escape. Rachel stirred. "Is it done?" she asked, voice thick with emotion. Derek wiped his face with the back of his forearm, voice hoarse. "Yes, it's done." He reached for the mirror. Derek held the mirror with both hands, steady as he could manage, though his fingers still trembled from the heat that had not yet fully left them. He angled the glass so Rachel could see the finished work without straining her neck. She lifted her head slowly, careful of the fresh tenderness along her ribs, and looked. For a long moment, she said nothing. Her lips parted, then closed again. Tears welled up instantly, spilling over without warning, tracing silent paths down her cheeks. "It's her," she whispered, voice cracking like thin ice. "It's exactly her." She reached out, not to touch the tattoo, but as though she wanted to cradle the face that now lived on her own skin. The eyes, that's how she looked at me every night. Like she already knew Lucas would be all right. Like she was promising me. Derek couldn't speak. His throat felt closed, sealed by the same tears that had come unbidden minutes earlier. He watched Rachel stare, transfixed, the way pilgrims sometimes stand motionless before an icon that has wept or bled or simply refused to be ordinary. She stayed that way for what felt like minutes, 5, maybe 10, until she finally drew a shuddering breath and looked up at him. "Thank you," she said, the words heavy with more than gratitude. "You have no idea what this means. Not just to me, to him. To us." She smiled through the tears, a small, radiant thing. "I'll never forget this." Derek managed a nod. He covered the tattoo with clear film, smoothed the edges with practiced care, and gave her the aftercare sheet he handed to every client. Though the instructions felt suddenly inadequate for what had just happened. Rachel paid in cash, left a generous tip he didn't deserve, thanked him again 3 more times, and walked out into the October afternoon carrying the image of the Mother of God against her heart. The door clicked shut. The studio fell silent except for the low hum of the ventilation system and the distant murmur of traffic far below. Derek didn't move for a long time. He remained standing beside the empty table, staring at the spot where Rachel had lain, as though the air still held the shape of her body. Then he reached for his phone, opened the camera roll, and pulled up the final photograph he'd taken before she left. The completed Virgin Mary, perfectly lit, hyper-realistic, technically flawless. The eyes in the photo were beautiful, deep, serene, full of quiet compassion. But they were only eyes. Ink and shadow. Nothing looked back. Nothing blinked. Nothing knew him. He set the phone down slowly, as if it might break. The rose scent had faded now, leaving only the familiar antiseptic smell of the studio. The heat in his hands had cooled to a faint warmth, like the memory of a fire. Yet the tears that had fallen during those final strokes were still wet on his cheeks. He wiped them away with the sleeve of his black shirt, then sat heavily in the client chair, elbows on knees, face in hands. What had just happened? He tried the rational explanations first, the way a man trained in precision tries to measure the immeasurable. Fatigue, 5 straight hours of intense focus. Low blood sugar. The scent? Maybe a neighbor's apartment window open somewhere in the building, a delivery of flowers riding the air shaft. The heat? Overworked muscles, poor circulation after gripping the machine too tightly. The blink? A trick of light, an eyelash in his own eye. Exhaustion playing games with perception. He had read about optical illusions, about how the brain feels and what the eyes expect to see. Yes, that was it. Except none of it fit, because the eyes had looked at him, not with judgment, not with accusation, but with something far more dangerous, recognition, as though they had been waiting for him all along. And the tears, those had come from somewhere deeper than logic could reach. They weren't about Rachel, or Lucas, or even the beauty of the work. They were about him. About a 15-year-old boy who had knelt beside his bed every night for months, begging for a miracle that never arrived. About a promise broken by silence. About 27 years of carrying that silence like a stone in the chest. Derek stood up abruptly, walked to the sink, splashed cold water on his face. He looked at himself in the small mirror above the faucet. Red-rimmed eyes, jaw tight. The same face he had seen every morning for decades. But something was different. The hardness around the mouth had softened, just a fraction. The eyes held a question they had never allowed themselves to ask before. He turned off the lights, locked the studio, descended the creaking stairs, stepped into the street where the late afternoon sun painted everything gold. People hurried past, taxis honked. Life continued as though nothing extraordinary had occurred 3 floors above. But something had, and Derek Collins, the man who never believed, who never prayed, who never broke his own rules, was no longer sure what he believed anymore. That night, he went home to Megan and Noah. Megan asked how the day had been. He said, "Fine," the way he always did. She looked at him a second longer than usual, sensing the shift, but she didn't press. She knew her husband carried things in silence. She had learned to wait until the silence itself asked to be broken down. He ate dinner, helped Noah with homework, kissed them both goodnight. Then he sat alone in the living room with the lights off, staring at the photograph on his phone one more time. The eyes in the image were still just ink, but he remembered what they had done, and he knew he would never forget. That night, Derek did not sleep. He lay beside Megan in the dark, staring at the ceiling where faint streetlight traced thin silver lines across the plaster. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw them again. Those eyes of ink that had looked straight through him, patient, sorrowful, knowing. He saw the blink that should never have happened. He felt the rose scent lingering in his nostrils like a memory that refused to fade. And beneath it all, rising like water through cracked earth, came the thing he had buried deepest. Emily. She returned to him in fragments, sharp and vivid after 27 years of deliberate forgetting. The way she used to laugh until she hiccuped. The ladybug she once taped to a piece of paper because it needed a home. The hospital room that smelled of bleach and rubber. The four-stand that beeped softly like a metronome counting down. And the nights he knelt beside his own bed, 15 years old, hands clasped so tightly the knuckles turned white, whispering the same plea over and over. "Please, save her. I'll do anything. I'll be good forever. Just don't take her." The answer had been silence. 3 days before her 11th birthday. Emily slipped away while Derek sat in the hallway holding a paper cup of lukewarm coffee his mother had pressed into his hands. He never cried at the funeral. He stood beside the small white coffin, jaw locked, eyes dry, and when people hugged him and said, "She's with God now," he nodded once and walked away. That was the day the rosary went into the backyard dirt. That was the day he decided there was no one listening, no one who cared enough to answer. And so he built the wall. No churches, no prayers, no saints, no Virgin Mary. No hope that could ever be broken again. But hope, once crushed, does not vanish. It hardens. It turns into anger disguised as indifference, into distance masquerading as freedom. For 27 years, Derek had worn that armor so well he forgot it was there. Until today. Until a pair of painted eyes looked at him and saw through every layer. Straight to the frightened boy still kneeling in the dark, in the empty studio the next morning, before the first client arrived. Derek sat in the same chair where Rachel had lain and let the dam break. He cried the way he hadn't since he was 16. Deep, wrenching sobs that shook his shoulders, that came from the marrow. He cried for Emily, for the summers she never saw, for the ladybugs she never collected again. He cried for the promises he had made and the God he had accused of breaking them. He cried for every time he had turned away a client asking for a crucifix or a rosary or a Madonna, telling himself it was professional preference when really it was terror. Terror of hoping again, terror of being disappointed again, terror of discovering that maybe, just maybe, there had been an answer all along, and he had been too angry to hear it some point. In the middle of the storm, he whispered into the silence, "What do you want from me?" The words came out broken, half prayer, half accusation. He didn't expect a voice from heaven. He didn't expect anything. He only needed to say it, to let the question exist in the air between him and whatever might be listening. "I prayed," he continued, voice raw. "You know I prayed. And you didn't listen. Why now? Why me? What was that thing I saw?" No answer came. Only the soft hum of the ventilation, the distant rumble of the city. Yet something shifted inside him, subtle as a tide turning. It wasn't belief, not yet. It was admission. Admission that what he had called disbelief had always been fear. Fear of opening the wound again. Fear of light entering the places he had sealed shut. He stayed there until the tears dried on his face, until his breathing steadied. Then he stood, washed his face in the sink, and began preparing for the day's appointments. The routine continued. Needles sterilized, inks arranged, chair wiped down. But the man performing the tasks was no longer the same that in the weeks that followed. The change was quiet, almost invisible to anyone who didn't know him well. He spoke less during sessions, listened more. When clients mentioned faith, he no longer changed the subject. He simply nodded, thoughtful. Megan noticed the difference first. The way he lingered a little longer when Noah said bedtime prayers. The way his shoulders carried less tension. She didn't ask. She waited. 3 weeks later, on a Sunday morning, Derek stood in the kitchen while Megan poured coffee. "I want to go to the cemetery," he said. Megan set the pot down carefully. In 15 years of marriage, he had never once visited Emily's grave. Not on anniversaries. Not on her birthday. Never. "Do you want company?" she asked gently. "No. I need to go alone." He drove out of the city, past the familiar suburbs, to the small graveyard tucked behind a stand of maples. The gate creaked when he pushed it open. He found the stone easily, gray granite, simple, her name and dates carved beneath a small carved lamb. He stood there a long time, hands in his pockets, not knowing what to do. Then he sat on the grass, cross-legged like he used to when they were kids, and he began to speak. That he told Emily about the tattoo, about the eyes that moved, about the roses, about the heat in his hands and the tears that came without warning. He told her he was sorry for the anger, for the distance, for turning his back on everything she had believed in so simply. "I don't know what it was," he said to the stone, to the wind, to the sky. "I don't know if it was real, but it happened, and it changed something." The leaves rustled above him. A single red leaf drifted down and landed on the grass beside his knee. That night, back home, he sat with Megan on the couch after Noah was asleep. For the first time in their marriage, he told her everything. The childhood prayers, the hospital, the funeral, the wall he had built. He told her about Rachel, about the Virgin Mary, about the impossible blink. Megan listened in silence, holding his hand. When he finished, she spoke softly. "I always knew there was something you carried. You never talked about it, but I could see it in the way you looked away when people mentioned God. I never pushed because I knew you'd have to find your own way." She squeezed his fingers. "I don't know what happened in that studio, and it doesn't matter whether it was a miracle or your mind playing tricks. What matters is what it did to you. You're softer now. You're open." Derek looked at her, eyes still red from the day's emotion. "I don't know what I believe yet," he said, "but I'm not afraid to wonder anymore." And for the first time in 27 years, that felt like enough. The transformation did not arrive in thunder or lightning. It came quietly, like dawn creeping over the East River, turning the water from black to silver without anyone noticing the exact moment it happened. Derek returned to the studio the following week and picked up the needle as he always had. The portraits he created were still flawless. Every eyelash, every pore, every subtle shift of light rendered with the same mastery that had built his reputation. Yet something intangible had entered the work. Clients began to notice it first, though they could not name it. "There's more feeling in this one," a woman said after receiving her grandfather's portrait. "Like he's really here." Derek only smiled, small and private, and said nothing. When people asked now for religious images, a sacred heart, a Saint Michael, a simple cross, he no longer refused. "I can do that," he would reply, voice calm, without the old automatic wall rising. He did not become a fervent evangelist. He did not hang crucifixes above the door or play Gregorian chant in the background. He simply allowed the possibility. He accepted that there might be something, someone, beyond the reach of his rational explanations, and for the first time in his adult life, that did not terrify him. One Saturday in early December, Noah came home from school with an invitation folded into his backpack. "Tommy's getting baptized next month, Dad. His mom said we could come if we want. Can we?" The boy's eyes were wide with the innocent excitement of a child who still believed everything was possible. Derek looked at his son, dark hair like Megan's, serious expression like his own, and felt something loosen inside his chest. "We can," he said simply. The church was small, a brick building in Brooklyn with stained glass windows that caught the winter light like jewels. Derek walked through the doors for the first time in nearly 3 decades. The scent of incense and old wood greeted him. The pews were half full, families whispering, children fidgeting. He sat beside Megan and Noah near the back, hands folded in his lap, heart beating harder than he expected. He did not join the prayers. He did not cross himself when the others did. But he stayed. He watched the priest pour water over Tommy's tiny head, heard the ancient words spoken over the child. "I baptize you in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit," and felt no anger rise in him. Only a quiet ache, like an old bruise finally beginning to heal. Months passed. Spring came. The waiting list remained long. The studio stayed the same, clean, bright, methodical. Derek continued to tattoo. Children's faces, wedding rings, memorials, now occasionally a rosary draped across a wrist or a small image of Our Lady of Guadalupe smiling from a shoulder blade. Each time he worked on a religious piece, he paused for a second before beginning the eyes. He remembered, and he worked with a tenderness he had not known he possessed. Late at night, when the house was quiet and Megan slept beside him, Derek sometimes opened his phone and looked at the one photograph he had never posted. Rachel's Virgin Mary, the eyes serene and deep. In the image they were only ink. Beautiful, yes, but ordinary. Yet he knew what he had seen that October afternoon. He knew the scent, the heat, the blink, the tears. He knew the way those eyes had looked at him as though they had always known him, had always been waiting. That he did not have answers. He did not need them anymore. What he had was something better, permission to wonder, permission to hope without fear, permission to believe that sometimes, in the most ordinary places, a tattoo studio on the 3rd floor of an old building in New York, the extraordinary chooses to show itself. Not to prove anything, not to win an argument, simply to be seen. And when it is seen, everything changes. Before we close this story, I want to invite you to become part of our little prayer community dedicated to the Virgin Mary. Here we gather from every corner of the world to pray together, to share the graces we have received, and to hold one another up in faith and hope. If something in Derek's journey stirred your heart, if you feel the gentle pull of Our Lady, click below and join us today. Come pray with us. You are not alone. And if you have read all the way to this moment, do one small thing for me. Write the word eyes in the comments below. Those eyes that looked at Derek, that changed everything. I want to see how many hearts this story has truly touched. Every time I read Eyes, I will know that one more person believes the tender, powerful miracles of the Virgin Mary still happen today. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs a fresh spark of hope. Subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another story of how the Mother of God reaches into ordinary lives and makes them extraordinary. May the Virgin Mary, gentle and strong, continue to watch over you and your family with those same loving eyes.